Back to the August Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. It is John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and we are here with our weekly check-in, chat, coffee talk, whichever it actually is. I think coffee talk was a very common one, or coffee chat, mainly because I do love the alliteration of it all. So we are here. I delved into the Irish Pagan School community social media group to pull out a query there today. Now we do receive email queries. We get over on our Patreon, and there's a lot of different places where people communicate, and our community space is also really another great place for people who are following our classes, and who are pretty much following an Irish pagan path to integrate kind of peer to peer and to be in community space, to be around like-minded individuals, in a safe, curated online space that focuses directly around those type of conversations from the classes and from our kind of cultural group that we put forward. So I delved in there to kind of find a question for us today to kind of explore a little bit about not just the Tuatha De Danann, but also the Fomorians and the Fir Bolg and the Nemedians, a lot of which I covered in my class, Taking of Ireland. But before we do that, do make sure you pop down into the description or wherever you're kind of experiencing this content. We have a link to a free resource at the Irish Pagan School. You sign up for that. It's a PDF document about, what are the good resources? What do we recommend as, good reading for you to be pursuing as you kick off or grow or choose to expand or explore your Irish pagan path? And because there's a lot of stuff out there that it's just a problem. To be fair, a lot of people say, well, Yeats is a very recognized Irish kind of writer from like the Romantic era of it all. Great poet, great kind of author, like really fantastic, well-revered individual. But there's parts of what he kind of has and what he kind of like talks about in his imagery, which has become conflated with what people believe paganism is in Ireland now, or the other crowd are the Shi, the Dinima. So there's a lot of kind of stuff that, like, we don't knock him for who he is. Absolutely, he was a very informative and influential member of Irish culture. Even today, like I studied his poetry in school when I was like educate in kind of state education. But there's parts of it that are just an absolute eye roll. Like Lady Gregory, absolutely another fantastic individual. We wouldn't have so much of the resources that we do have if not for her going around and collecting this information. But a lot of it is colored through a certain amount of bias, a certain amount of privilege, and um, uh, uh, an oddly kind of twisted narrative. So it's important to know what your resources are and like where the origins of the information is coming from, as much as know the information itself. Because you may find that some of the individuals you would quote might not actually be the best individuals in the world. Um, a great example, maybe a more modern example is, well, actually, more modern example, you could say Gary Glitter, and you love Gary Glitter music, or in a more modern example, you love R. Kelly music. Um, all of these, like, you might enjoy the music, but they're literal pedophiles or like, accused, alleged. Um, and so there is this whole narrative about separating artists from the art, but when we kind of follow an energetic spiritual path, we're directing our energy towards stuff. When we spend money, we're directing our energy towards stuff. When we kind of engage, when we listen, when we like explore and expose ourselves to information, we're engaging energetically with that. So, intentionally choosing where to direct your energy and who to direct your energy to is better, like, and important to do, as much as there's the global spanning phenomenon of a certain individual's books and movies and all the rest of it about a magical society. That individual is an absolute 100% out and out transphobe and like hater, and they damage those people. Like, there is a body count for those kind of circumstances. And I feel like I'm stepping across away from myself, but this is what I mean by good resources. And this is the impact of choosing the right resources. It's not just about, well, we agree with what these people say. it's also about who these people are, what they put out in the world, what energy and effort they kind of share in the world. And that is important too when we consider the right relationship that we have with our community, with our culture, with our deities, and with ourselves at the end of the day. So resources there, pop on down, grab it, sign up. It'll get you onto the mailing list, and then you can get reminders about the great content that we release and invitations to the hangouts that we do every second Saturday, or classes. I had the pleasure of hosting and facilitating the class with Morgan Daimler on sea maidens to seal folk and the folklore of Irish ocean and ocean entities and ocean entities is probably the best way to put it, or water and entities, spirits or creatures. And it was absolutely fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So that's over at the Irish Pagan School if anyone's interested in that as well. But to get back to our topic, we had a question, like it popped up into the Irish Pagan School community. It's a social media space that we have currently hosted in Facebook, and it is for students of the school only. With the focus and the intent to be discussion around the classes, discussion around the culture, discussion around the topic of Irish paganism. It is not a generic pagan kind of group for love and light, crystal healing, kind of pagan memes. Like, that's not what we do there. It is kind of, we try and steer more towards talk about the culture, talk about the academics, talk about the origin, and then talk about how we are applying those in our faith and in our spiritual beliefs and our energy practices as we go forward each day as living pagan. So the question that popped in there, it was from an individual called Rahali Bared. I hope I pronounced that right. Wondering where some of the other races or beings or peoples or groups like the Fomorians, Fir Bolg, fit in the Irish history, mythology, cosmology, especially in relation to the Danann and the Milesians. I'm just wondering where the lines of history and mythology and everything blend over. It's a really, really great question, and it's one that I spent about a bit of time exploring myself because I had the same question. I had that kind of same query to try and crack it all down in my brain. So the stories that we have, the story that all of this comes from is referred to as the Taking of Ireland or the Book of Invasions. The Irish for it is Lara Gavala Éireann. And so in really awesome kind of old Irish, like the Lara Gavala, Lara's book, Éireann is Ireland, and then Gavala is either taking or invading. But what it comes down to is it's talking about the different kind of tribes and how they arrived into Ireland. And what Ireland doesn't have is a creation myth in anywhere in our mythology, or if we had, it was in oral traditions a long time ago and was never documented down. But what we have then is this series of stories that go back into our myth and back into our legends, which talk about Ireland existing, and it talks about the different tribes, the different peoples who came into Ireland and their kind of successions. Now, because this was documented in the early medieval period, a lot of the stuff or the information is put in regards to timelines. It's kind of benchmarked against the biblical timeline as it was understood or as was commonly accepted or beginning to be like dominated in regards to history and academia at that point. So we do have, for example, one of the early tribes that comes into Ireland. It is the Caesarians, and Caesar came in with her 50 maidens and a couple of men, and they found Ireland empty, and they kind of inhabited there until the flood came, as in the big old biblical flood, and it was that wiped out the Caesarians. Apart from Fintan, one guy, one individual, old Fintan, who remained the storyteller, remained in Ireland to record this tale. And then he remembers the arrivals of the other peoples, the other tribes that came in. And so we had the Partholon. No, it was the Partholonians came in, and then they were wiped out by a plague. Then we had the Caesarians. Then we had the Nemedians. And the Nemedians, this is where we have the first kind of interaction or mention of the Fovera or the Fomorians. So the Fomorians were not in Ireland or of Ireland at that point. They were a different people or a different tribe altogether. And in some understandings, they were a seafaring tribe or a pirate kind of raiding kind of groups. What we have seen in more modern like media For example, the 2000 AD comics Slain really kind of twists the lore and the folklore, and the Fomorians are in that, but they're shown as like horrible, beastly, monstrous kind of creatures from under the water and under the waves. That is not the case in regards to the actual lore and the actual information that we have, which we will see when we get to the talk of the Tuatha De Danann. So the Nemedians actually come into Ireland and they find Fintan there, and Fintan's like, yeah, this is a fucking great place, and they populate and they grow there. But the Nemedians were fleeing oppression from this Fomorian enemies, um, and that oppression eventually followed them to Ireland. So Ireland then was placed under taxation by the Fomorians to such a degree that there was no smoke from any chimney, which wasn't kind of paying a tithe to the Fomorians, or like a percentage of people or cattle or grain was being taken from Ireland. So under this oppression, the sons of Nemed come together, and they're really at a loss, and they go to Fintan and they're like, "What the fuck do we do?" And Fintan's response to them is, "You just better get out." And the only way to kind of manage or to live or to survive this is to leave Ireland. And so this is what happens with the sons of Nemed. So the sons of Nemed gather up their individual groups of people, and they then leave Ireland. And what happens with our tale is that those tribes who left Ireland become the Tuatha De Danann and become the Fir Bolg for their return. And this is where the story kind of carries on. So we've gone from the biblical flood era into this period in between. We do know from the later in the Ulster Cycle, apparently is when Concover MacNassa, the Ulster king, is born. That's apparently, supposedly, the same day Jesus Christ is born. Now, that is a very common trope that we actually find. But if this is the benchmarks of the parameters, then everything before Concover in the Ulster Cycle is BCE, before Common Era, if, in essence. So the story then carries on that the sons of Simeon, because Simeon was one of the sons of Nemed. Simeon and his group of people ended up going out and going east, and they find themselves down in the Mediterranean. They go to Greece. They then, find land in Greece. They're given land in Greece. They then change it. They cultivate the land. They make it fantastic. But then the Greeks come along and shift them off that land, giving them a stretch of wasteland. So there's a whole kind of story that happens with the Fir Bolg at this particular point, because that's what they know themselves as. Because the story goes, they're carrying in bags, kind of like big bags of dirt, up into these mountainous areas that they've been given to make it arable, to make it cultivatable. And so there's generations of them there living, toiling in order to kind of provide for themselves from the land that was given to them. They didn't get moved off it once again, twice again. And the third time, the Greeks come along and they're like, listen, yeah, we need you to get out of this lovely land that is here now and move on to some other area. The Fir Bolg at that point, descendants of the son of Simeon, remember their old stories. They remember a land that used to be theirs. They remember a fantastic island which was bountiful and glorious. And so they decide to leave. And so the story goes, they take the bags, they make them into boats, and then they plan to leave and head back to the home of their ancestors, and to find a place that can be theirs again. One thing I love about the story is they're about to get on the boats and leave when one lad is like, you know, these people here in Greece are a bit of a dick to us. So why the fuck shouldn't we raid the shit out of it before we leave? Because we're leaving anyway. And so it says the Fir Bolg kind of absolutely like steal everything they can, set a whole lot of shit on fire, and full on GTFO on the boats, to make their way back to Ireland. And they find Ireland empty. And so at that point, these people, this tribe, kind of come back and they take over Ireland. But they're descended from the same original tribe, the Nemedians. But we don't know what happened to the Nemedians we don't know what happened to those who remained behind when the sons of Nemed left with their people. So, but it does say that Fir Bolg came back and they found Ireland empty. So obviously we can only presume that the situation with the Fomorians didn't go very well for the remaining Nemedians. Um, the next individual to know of is Boatok. Boatok was one of the other sons of Nemed, and he took his people and went into the northern islands of the world, is what it says. It doesn't give a particular place, but they leave out of Ireland and they go into the northern islands of the world where they grow and they kind of populate and their numbers kind of expand into their tribe. And similar things. Slightly different things actually. Like, we don't have stories of oppression. We have a story of four great cities, in fact. Findus, Falius, Gorius, and Murius. And there's this poem that talks about these great cities of the Tuatha Dé Danann, from which come the four great treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann, which is the spear of Nuada, the spear of Lu, the sword of Nuada, because those two things get kind of twisted around in the stories. The Cleave Sullus, sort of light, which Nuada has. The Leafal, which is the stone of destiny, which would proclaim sovereignty, stone of sovereignty, came from Falius. And then my personal favorite, the Cauldron of the Dagda, which came out of Murius, the place of pinnacles. So it's a fascinating story to talk about those magic items in their own ways. But this culture of this new tribe descended from Boatok of the Nemedians want to kind of also find themselves longing for home. They find themselves longing for this island of their ancestors, this amazing kind of glorious place. And so they too gather up. They take the treasures from the four cities. They get the prophecy from the four kind of sorcerers of those cities, or like druids or leaders of those cities. But they don't come straight back to Ireland. They actually says they go around the north of the world, learning all of the arts of druidry and occult knowledge, and then they arrive back into Ireland. And in the meantime, of course, the Fir Bolg have been in Ireland for a while. They have expanded into Ireland. They have their own rule of it. It's currently being ruled by a king called Uchid. And Uchid has this vision about a whole murder of crows. Actually, all these black birds kind of fly in, and he kind of strikes one of them, the noblest of the birds, and cleaves off its arm. And he doesn't know what it is. And he talks to his druid, Kesrid, and Kesrid kind of performs his auguries and comes back and is like, yeah, that was a prophetic dream. There's a tribe coming to Ireland. They are a fleet of 1,000 champions, is what it actually says. Capable in every skill and every talent, and they will be victorious in every strain. So that is then the arrival of the Tuatha Dé Danann into Ireland, which leads to the first conflict in the Battle of Moytura. So I could go on and on about, like, I actually taught a class on this. As I said, it's the taking of Ireland, and it views the return of the tribes that come back into Ireland from the Fir Bolg to the Tuatha Dé Danann, but then also to the Milesians, and the Milesians are the last tribe to come into Ireland. The descendants of the Milesians are said to be the Gaels, and the Gaels are said to be the people that we come from. Or like the human descendants of our world, like, the Irish descendants are said to be from these Milesians or Milisponia that came out of Spain as a conquering army, no less, who then came into Ireland. So there's a lot of information that talks about the way the Tuatha Dé Danann came back into the Fomorians, which was trying to find a share of their ancestral homeland. In essence, is the Fir Bolg and the the Fir Bolg and the Tuatha Dé Danann story. The Tuatha Dé Danann later, in the come under oppression of the ancient enemy, the Fomorians, again turn up, and that leads to the second battle of Moytura. So, if you're interested in me just paraphrasing the first and second battles of Moytura, maybe let me know in the comments. But the second battle of Moytura then sees the Tuatha Dé Danann dominant. They see them ascendant from the Fomorian invasion that had actually happened. But what eventually comes is this last invasion from the Milesians, which leads to the end of the Tuatha Dé Danann dominance and them going into the Hollow Hills, or becoming the people of the Sidhe. So all of this then is still within the mythical kind of cycle. All of this is still within the time of legend, before Common Era. What is believed by a lot of people, myself kind of included to a certain degree, is that when we look at the time frames and the types of stories that are happening, with the arrival of the Tuatha Dé Danann And actually, with one of the things Brest, the failed king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, offers when he is kind of captured post Second Battle of Moytura is knowledge of farming. So we can see with the stories about them clearing forests and kind of creating plains, irrigating areas, and that does thematically tie up with the Neolithic period and the early farming period. Then we'd move into, of course, the later Bronze Age, and so we're then dealing with, you know, the growth and the shift and the change in technology that comes from that. And after the mythological cycle, which deals predominantly with the Lair Gabála Éireann and a lot of these other mythical tales around the Tuatha Dé Danann, we then move into the Ulster Cycle. And the Ulster Cycle tales, the most common and most centered of which is, of course, the Tombo Chuaille, the raid of the capital of Cooley, which is the conflict between Connacht and Ulster. A lot of people believe that this time frame, historically speaking, sits somewhere between Bronze Age to Iron Age. We know that Cullen, for example, the smith, is a well-respected, well-revered person in the Ulster, in the society of Ireland, actually, not just in Ulster. So much so that it is King Concover MacNassa who comes with his warriors to Cullen to feast there, and it's that story that leads to the death of Cullen's hound by Satanta Maxultum, and the taking of the name, the Hound of Cullen, by this young child to become Cú Cullen. So the fact that he's a smith is very, very important there, because it is talking about the importance and the rarity of metallurgical knowledge at that particular time. Of course, in the older mythological cycle, we have the story of Gwivnu, like hammering out the metal spears, making spears that would drop a mortal blow. Anyone hit by any of the weapons made by Gwivnu, it's a guaranteed kill shot, because of his skill and his talent with working metal. Except, of course, Gwivnu. Gwivnu takes a hit from one of his own spears, and then he pulls it out and he kills the person who kind of killed him with it. And then, of course, he's taken care of by Teen Kex to make sure he doesn't die. More on Gwivnu if anyone is interested. But the timeline that we have, a lot of people, and myself included, consider the Ulster Cycle kind of timelines falling mainly around the Bronze Age, maybe the advent of Iron Age, because we have a story of a young Satanta Maxultum taking up arms, and he walks into the armory and he's kind of picking up all these weapons to try and see what ones would work for him. And he ends up smashing every fucking weapon in the place, except for the set of armor and weapons that were the best set of armor and weapons that was made for Concover himself. So it's not said specifically clearly that it was iron weapons or, you know, anything like that at all. But it's possible that all of the bronze weapons were not fit for demigod use, but the iron weapons could kind of sustain a little bit more. Maybe. Again, I am kind of suppositioning here, but given the question is asking, this is also my view and my own experience going through this content and story work. So the fit and the timeline there. Oh, yes. After I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but after the first Battle of Moytura between the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fir Bolg, the Fir Bolg are not wiped out. It's not a genocide. It is not a war of eradication. It is a staged conflict that both sides agree to after a period of time, after a weapon exchange, after a knowledge exchange to make sure that'd be a fair scrap. The Fir Bolg actually take Connacht. They're given Connacht, the west province of Ireland, in order to sustain and grow. And so there are still Fir Bolg kind of people around. Even Lugh, when we come to the second battle of Moytura, one of Lugh's his foster parent is Tailchu, who is a woman of the Fir Bolg. So culturally speaking, they're still engaged, they're still interacting with each other. It wasn't an eradication, it wasn't like kind of tribes getting destroyed or anything like that at all, which unfortunately we see when the Milesians arrive with the complete dominance of the Tuatha Dé Danann and removing them from society or forcing them into the other world. But more on that if anyone's interested. I know I'm leaving lots of teasers here. Maybe remind me. I'm just conscious that I don't want to kind of talk too long, because I could and have talked for hours about this, because I absolutely love this content. I'm very, very passionate about it, and hopefully that's coming across in this video. But to pull it back onto the question, there is a lot of information that kind of sets around them. The Fomorians are this kind of exterior threat time again, but we do see that Bress, in fact, the failed king of the Tuatha Dé Danann that leads to the second battle of Moytura, he's half Fomorian. He's not some half monstrous thing. In fact, he's said to be so beautiful. The reason why he became king of Ireland after Nuada had his cut off is because he was so beautiful. And because the Tuatha Dé Danann were concerned about a Fomorian issue, and they figured if we put a Fomorian, half Fomorian king in situ, Fomorians aren't going to be a problem. But it turns out that Bress favored his Fomorian ancestry over his Tuatha Dé Danann ancestry. And like, you know, his father was a Fomorian who came up out of the waves and was absolutely drop dead, knock dead gorgeous, that, you know, and the Tuatha Dé Danann woman who kind of found him or met him was delighted to see him. And she, in fact, she actually wept. Etna wept when he was going because he was so beautiful and she didn't know like when she'd ever see him again. And he's like, well, you're going to conceive a son for me, and make sure you give this son this ring, and then 100, he will 100% know me when I return. Um, so there is so much kind of information around there. There's so many different tribes and their interactions with the landscape and with each other that it is worth kind of exploring in much more detail, or even taking that class, Taking of Ireland, if you're interested, at the Irish Pagan School. Um, what I would say is that, okay, I know I can say a heck of a lot, and I already have said a heck of a lot. The thing that really kind of underlines almost all of these stories and all of these interactions is this love of Ireland. You know, we have these tribes who are in Ireland and absolutely love Ireland, but then they have to leave Ireland because of the suppression. And then the descendants outside of Ireland feel the longing for Ireland and come back to it. And then, you know, even their descendants kind of leave Ireland and come back to Ireland. The whole Lereg of All Éireann is the story of emigration and immigration, both out and into Ireland, of various peoples and various tribes. That has always been Ireland's narrative. Even in my lifetime, I was born in the 80s, like, you know, there was mass immigration out of Ireland in order to find jobs and send money back home. Like, a lot of people point at the 1854 Great Famine and how that created diaspora all over the world. In the 1980s, there were still people like young sons out of Ireland going out there into Australia, going out into like England, going into America, because that's where the work was. And yet still those people all over the world feel the love of their ancient homelands, and their children are told the stories of their homeland. My brother-in-law, in fact, both of my brother-in-laws emigrated to Australia, and one of them was exactly my age. And he came back because, you know, he loved his island and loved his homeland, and, you know, he had always talked to his kids about Ireland, and he wanted them to grow up in Ireland, and so he made sure he came back for it. So it is a place that has a lot of pull and a lot of power. Our little island, our small island, as I've said before, you can drive coast to coast, left to right in 3 hours, 4 hours, maybe, if you're going right tip to tip, you know, top to bottom, 5 hours, maybe six, you know, and like, that's it. That's the island. It's not the biggest place in the world, but it seems to have a really big impact and a really big draw and a really big love. It inspires a lot of love and a lot of narrative and a lot of story. And that is one thing I'm aware of, and delighted and honored and privileged to be someone who is of this country and gets to live in this country. As I said, it's not common for people of my era, when, you know, work had to be found outside of the island. So yeah, the last I would say to that is that anyone who tries to espouse the values that Ireland is for Irish people only, get fucked. I'm sorry. What is Irish people if not people who are of Ireland, Irish culture, Irish ethnicity? And we're all over the world. Our descendants are all over the world, and nearly almost all of them feel the love of the island and want to like honor that, respect that, connect with that, and come back to it if they can, or at least visit. So, you know, also people coming from other places around the world, coming as refugees, fleeing oppression, which is currently happening now in our world. You know, I'm trying to return that away because Irish culture doesn't have room for our island doesn't have room for people, doesn't have room for more culture or to embrace the variety of Irish of humanity in our world. Sorry, I'm very kind of passionate about this, and I'm very kind of annoyed that people would try and claim that Irish identity is under threat because people who are not originally of the island are coming into the island. Get fucked. This island has always had a way of transmuting hate, transmuting intolerance, and building a love of the landscape, a love of our culture, a love of our history. That no matter where you or your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents, your whatever were from, or even are outside of Ireland, the Irish culture, the Irish ethnicity is so pervasive and so strong that like it has so much love. It's never going to go anywhere. Absolutely not. We know in our history that the Normans, for example, and the Anglo-Saxons, I think it was specifically the Normans when they came over, they embraced Irish culture so much and so strongly, copying the hairstyles, copying the clothing styles, copying the like unique dyeing of colors of fabrics that were here in Ireland, that they became referred to as more Irish than the Irish themselves. You know, it is that love of our culture and our love of ethnicity that will carry us all the way forward, no matter what happens in our world. And the concept that you would turn someone away who needs help. You know, I'm sorry, like that was done to Irish people. It's not so long ago. Again, I mentioned the 1850s, early 1900s. There was still signage out, no other place in the world, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So how in the fuck could we, you know, having been on the receiving end of that kind of disregard and oppression, do that to other people? No, absolutely not. Get fucked. Um, I have strayed into rant territory here, and I'm aware of that. Um, as I said, it's something I'm very, very passionate about. And all of these old stories, all of these old cultural narratives, and all of our mythology and all of our legends exists to tell us a story, exists to give us information, to give us perspective, so that we can look at things in a different way. We can look at our life in a modern sense and try and understand it more, or trying to gain a perspective that encourages us or helps us to do better for ourselves and for our communities. And that is our hope here at the Irish Pagan School as well. So bit of a ramble rant. As I said, you know, we've gone from all through like the tribes of Ireland coming into Ireland and where and how and when that might actually fit. And hopefully that's given some kind of answer to the query that popped up in our community, but then also the importance of looking beyond the story and looking into what is it, the reason, what is the purpose of this story, if not to tell us that, you know, we are part of tribes that have moved around our world. All of us are part of some collective, some community, but it all comes back to the same thing, comes back to the same narratives. And those who come with respect and compassion might need to kind of struggle to find their place, might need to struggle to find their way. But, you know, if you don't come in dominance and aggression, you'll probably find yourself being very comfortably made wherever you happen to land your feet under you, especially in Ireland. But again, I'm absolutely 100% hand on heart biased. Ireland is one of the best places in the world. And it seems to be something that attracts a lot of attention, a lot of love from even people who, you know, were not born here, have never lived here, or who, you know, emigrated here or like, well, immigrated into here, and still find that they absolutely love this island. So I think it's just magic. Anyway, so until next time, look after yourself, take care. Do pop down and pick up on those free resources. The good resources are very, very important to get the right feet under the table and the right kind of grounding as you begin to explore your growth and your life as an Irish pagan with us at the Irish Pagan School. I'll probably throw a link to the class, Taking of Ireland, if anyone is interested in that. And as ever, look after yourself, take care, and slán. Goodbye.